Hi, I'm Lee Mergner, editorial content producer for WBGO. My guest today is Mark Wexler, head of Candid Records, which has been releasing an impressive mix of music from both new and historical artists. Among the former are Eliana Elias, Terry Lynn Carrington, Wayne Shorter, and among the latter are albums produced by Nat Hentoff featuring Abbey Lincoln, Charles Mingus, Max Roach, and other jazz greats. The label, now under new leadership, has a long history in jazz. And today we're going to talk about its past, its present, and its future. Mark, welcome to WBGO Studios.
Lee, it's great to be here and honored to be on BGO. I grew up listening to that station and really glad to be a part of this.
Yeah, you're a Jersey boy, a Jersey guy.
Jersey boy, Jersey guy. I know a lot of people at BGO, knew a lot of people at BGO. So followed the history, and it was a big part of my life growing up. I was into NEW and BGO. So I got both sides of the equation.
Now, talk a little bit. The label, as I mentioned, has a long history. Tell us a little bit about that history and how it sort of ended up coming, into its most recent permutation.
Well, it was really formed in the late 50s by a gentleman by the name of Archie Bleyer. And then as time went on, he kind of flipped it over and wanted to do jazz, and he hooked up with Nat.
Yeah, Nat Hentoff.
Yeah, I'm thinking Nate. It's Nat. Nat Hentoff, whom you know very well, because he obviously at one point went ahead and wrote for Jazz Times and did a lot of different things. But at that point in time, he picked this guy, Nat, and Nat had this thing that he wanted to present jazz in a particular way. And it also coincided where there was a lot of civil unrest in the country at that point. And jazz musicians in particular were looking for ways to express themselves musically. And so when he set up shop in New York back in the early 60s, 1960 to be exact, he started, running in and out, jazz musicians, and they would record albums, kind of like a Motown-esque in the way that it was done, where you had a band there and the band would be there, and then all of a sudden the stars would come in and come in and sit in, and or they would bring some of their players with them and obviously set up for the session. And out of that era came some tremendously impactful records in the history of jazz music in particular. And one that really spoke to the times and still speaks to the times today was done by Max Roach, and it was entitled We Insist. And the whole premise behind this album was that Max was really frustrated with the way life was going at that point with all the civil injustices, and really wanted to express himself. And he did so with this album and brought in, other artists, Abbey Lincoln being one of them, and recorded it. And it became a statement piece where it was expressing musically both titles of the songs and the way the songs were constructed. It became a piece that was regarded as, it became historical because it's still today, when you talk about what happened in that period of time in the jazz world, that particular record comes up a lot because it was a statement piece. And a lot of the artists that came through there at that point, they weren't as quote unquote vocal about it, but they certainly were as passionate about the times they were living in and how were they going to express themselves. And Nat kind of captured that. And I really give him a lot of credit because you don't hear a lot about Nat Hentoff, but the fact is that he produced some really remarkable records. And we were very fortunate in being able to, get this catalog and really mine it. And I call it the gem of a catalog because there's a lot of stuff in there that real hardcore jazz aficionados know right away. And but some of these records and some of the artists, whether it's Mingus or Monk or Max Roach or Abbey Lincoln, I mean, these are people, Cecil Taylor, Kenny Barron, people know them all over the world. So it really was something that when Glenn Barros and John Burke called me and said, listen, I'd like to get together with you and talk about this label that we just purchased, and we want you to run it. Now, I had worked with them for 20 years at Concord Records, so I had moved down to Florida thinking, sun, the beach. Of quieter lifestyle. Well, doesn't always work out that way, because after working with these guys for those 20 years, I had a great deal of respect. And I said, all right, I'll take it over. He goes, we want you to run the label too. All right. So my life changed again. It's another chapter. I call it the second act with Glenn and John. And excuse me. And here I am. And the label itself is just a great piece of work that went through a variety of different owners.
Right.
And with each ownership, it kind of changed the tenor of the label, and not making it better or worse, but just certainly the way in which albums were made and presented. It made it kind of a nice mix of music and gave us a nice platform to work with. So there's about 300 titles in the Candid Records library.
Wow.
And we officially launched it actually this year. In April was the official launch. Prior to that, we had signed a couple of artists, and put them out, new releases, Count Basie and Stacey Kent and Ileana Elias. And we put those out in the fall prior to the launch, because we weren't ready to launch it, because we had to really start from the beginning. We had to take down the old website, build a new website, make sure everything was accurate, really prepare ourselves to tell the history and give the label the homage it deserved, for being this little label that not a lot of people know about. But when you start mentioning the artist, there's no doubt they know about them. So it's an exciting time for us, and knock on wood, it's been well received. So we're really happy.
I think you did a great job with the whoever did a great job with the website, because it really has a nice way of introducing the sort of history of it. And yeah, I think that was really a good thing, because it is, it's a great catalog, but of course you've got new artists too. So now you say this is your second act, but in many ways it's your third, because your period working for GRP, was one of the more important labels of the 80s and 90s. What did you take from that experience that sort of, you used or are able to use now with Candid? What lessons did you learn from, I guess, Larry, or even your own self, mistakes you made and so on?
Both. I mean, GRP was an amazing label. I started there. There were 3 people there. So it was a great run during a great time period. You and I know each other from that time period, because the music, the genre of jazz was really, an incredible run, where the popularity of it also coincided with the relaunch of CD, or not the relaunch, but the launch of CDs. We were called the Digital Master Company. But what I took from it is that when you're dealing with music like jazz, one, you have to have an appetite for it and have to believe in it, which I do and did. And 2, when you're marketing and selling it and getting it out to the consuming public, it's not, you're not marketing and selling Bruce Springsteen, or Taylor Swift, but you're reaching an audience where there's a lot of little pieces that get picked up based on their insight into what you're doing. And the sum of the total is really what's important. And that's how GRP really came to exist, is because it wasn't about one particular artist that they focused on and that was the hit. It was about getting the music out to the masses, but with lots of different types of music for people to choose from. And that's really what happened at GRP, which kind of gave me an insight into how to market and sell music, and really hone in on your consumer and try to reach them and give them the offering that you're offering, and see if they are interested. And it became wildly successful during that time period. The 80s were a great period for jazz in general. And then I went on to form my own label with Polygram. And then after that, I started with Concord back in 1999. And at that point, they were up in Concord, California. And again, it was a very small label. It was a jazz label started by Carl Jefferson. I won't go through all the history, but the fact of the matter is that it's it grew and it grew and it went through its machinations. There were some pretty dark times in that period because of the way the music business was starting to fail. And then all of a sudden, Napster came into play, and then streaming came into play, and everything kind of changed. So I was there for almost 19 years, and it went from 5 people to almost 500 people. And
Yeah, they acquired quite a bit of catalog, of course, over those years. All those fantasy ones, and
yeah. Well, their acquisitions have been incredible, and the reality is that it now is considered the 5th largest music label in the world, which is pretty impressive for a small independent label that started in Concord, California. And during that time period, they actually, moved the company down to California, Beverly Hills, and I was the senior vice president of the company, and then the executive vice president, and then I became chief operating officer of the company. All this time, I was still a Jersey boy, so I was doing a lot of flying to keep up with things.
Oh boy!
And then what ended up happening is that I made a life change and moved. And once I made that move, the previous president of Concord and the president of Concord Music Group, they left the company as well. They formed a company and decided they were going to start acquiring catalogs of music that they believed in for the music's sake. And that was always the mantra: is let's do things that we really believe in and have fun with it. And one of the first acquisitions was Candid Records. And I think right at the same time, or the second, I don't remember the sequence, but it was all in the same time period, they acquired Alligator Records.
Oh, so, Bruce Eigler's blues label. Wow, I didn't know that.
So, we have a great representation of blues. We have a great representation of jazz and blues through Candid. And we're building that now. And to do that, you feel like you have to take the historical aspect of what the label is and find out where the gems are, and then get those out there in the way that you want to present them properly. And that audience still believes in this music. So, of course, streaming gives a platform where anybody can get anything anytime, which is great. CDs are hanging on, not yet gone, but certainly looks like that's the way it's going to be. I hope not personally, but and then of course vinyl, which has come back, right. And that's kind of the amazing story in the music business, is that here is something that everybody flipped the switch and said, "Oh no, we don't need vinyl anymore. Let's go to CD." And I know that because I sat on the compact disc group board when they made that decision. So we're releasing the vinyl, and everything we do from the Candid catalog is being remastered by one of the greatest mastering engineers in the world, Bernie Grundman.
Oh, wow. So he's the man.
Yep. And he's done everything from Michael Jackson, Mary J. Blige. I mean, just the body of work that this guy has done is just incredible, like none other. And he's just got such a great ear. And so we went to Bernie, whom we all knew. We went to Bernie and said, look, we want to launch this label, but we want to remaster these things so they come up to speed, so-called, for what the sonic capabilities are in today's world. And Bernie accepted the challenge. And from that point forward, there are 3 major things we're doing on the vinyl side. I mean, everything is remastered, whether it's streaming or the CD, but on vinyl in particular, we're doing it, we're pressing it 180 grams. And the jackets, we're making them as tip-on jackets, which was actually the way jackets used to be made when records first came out. They adhere the cover to cardboard, and it gives the feel, the girth that you and I remember holding those jackets, sitting down and listening to a piece of music and reading the jackets because we could see the print. And so we decided to do those 3 things to really demonstrate that the way we were putting this music out was to really get the best out of it. The music was there. With Bernie Grundman's remastering, it really came to life. And then to have it on 180 gram, which for audiophiles, they love that because obviously it just sounds better than 120 grams. And then, of course, to make the presentation the way we want it to be visually, we went with the tip-on jacket. So that's going to happen all the way through the release of our Candid reissues.
Now you,
go ahead.
Oh, you talked about, your and we both talked about your experience at GRP, and GRP, of course, hung its hat on the CD, this new technology, and now, of course, you're at the other end of that. How? I mean, everyone's talking about, obviously streaming is what's here, and there's no denying it. But how is the business model? How can it work? Given can it work for a label that, if they're not selling physical product? Well, other than now the vinyl.
It's difficult. It's very difficult because our consumer is in a transitional period. They're not running up to stream everything because they got to hear the latest, greatest. They may use it as a tool to search something out, but there's still physical consumers out there that want to hold it, feel it, touch it, and stick it either in their CD tray or put it on their platter for vinyl. So, that balance of being cognizant of that and being aware of that, you cater to whoever is going to consume this product and how they're consuming it. You want to reach them because the jazz market is still a small market. It's not a big market, but it's a loyal market. And once you're a jazzer, you're a jazzer. So based upon that, you're loyal to the music and you want to hear more, or you want to hear what some of the greats did in the past, but bring it up to today's standards. And that's what we're trying to do.
How were the recordings? Were the tapes sort of in good shape? It's sort of amazing to think about that, that this material recorded on tape back in 60 years ago. 60 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, 60 years ago. To answer your question, there are some tapes that were very well preserved. Some tapes were not. You have to bake them and go through the whole process to get them up so that they're playable. And that's another reason we had Bernie Gorman involved, because he is meticulous in how he can take old master tapes and do the right thing. They were stored fairly well, but I'm not going to tell you it's a perfect world, because it's not. And in some cases, finding the master tapes is difficult. The Nat Hentoff era, they are coming from the original master tapes, and we're being very transparent about it. If we don't have the master tape, it's coming from the master, but not the original master tape. But in this particular case, for the first, it's going to be almost 15 reissues, because we did 10 last year. We're actually doing 16 this year. We're trying to get as many that have the original master tapes available to us. They're gone. But we're fortunate that a lot of them are still around, and we know how to treat them to get them ready for the whole process, to go back through the whole thing and remaster it, then make the lacquers, then make the stampers. And the vinyl process is still a laborious process, which I totally understand from a business point of view, why when CDs became popular, everybody said, that's expensive to do. The machinery to make press vinyl.
Oh, it's ugly. It's ugly stuff too. Toxic, a lot of it.
Yeah. So, and the ironic part about it is that there are more consumers than there are discs at this point. So the wait time from the time that you say, I want to put out a Max Roach record, it takes almost 6 months from start to the time you can even start pressing the record, because of all the stops you have to make and the periods you have to wait because there's people in front of you.
Boy, you and I can remember that time when those pressing plants in New Jersey were, they were going gangbusters, and it was quite something to see it. It was.
They were dinosaurs that were left to die, and so when vinyl came back, people were running to these places that stored old junk, and they were finding these old pressing plants, and they rebuilt some of them.
Wow!
But of course, there were a lot of them that are dead. So that's where the shortage comes into play, because like you said, back in the day when we were buying records at Corvettes every week or wherever we could, they were pressing them every day, all day long, and you had to turn it around. You turned it around, you had it a few days later.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things we were talking about is another change is the media, which I had worked in and still do, which is that newspapers had a jazz writer, there were weeklies, there still are the three major jazz magazines, and radio, you have the radio stations that play jazz, some of them 24 hours, 24/7, but as time has gone on, a lot of those have been replaced by news and talk. A lot of the public radio stations go, yeah, that's a no. We can do better with news and talk. So, my question is, how do you adapt to that changing media environment where those channels or platforms or outlets aren't quite there as much?
Well, you adapt like anything else. If it's not there, it's not there. So you go
Yeah.
to the people that are.
Mhm.
We're thankful for people that have withstood the test of time, and you work with a great group of people at WBGO that has withstood the test of time, and certainly is a leader in what they do on the radio side. Um, and with the technology that exists today, BGO has a much greater reach than it did when you and I were kids listening to it.
Right.
So that's the good news. The bad news is there's not a lot of BGOs out there. And when you go to the press, well, not the press, but when you go to the print side of things, you're right. I mean, if you go to the major newspapers, first of all, a lot of the major newspapers don't even exist anymore.
There you go.
And so when you do go to the ones that still do exist, they're being very selective on what they pick to write about on the entertainment side. And yeah, I mean, the big hitters in the music business still get their fair share of press. But when you're dealing with a delicacy like we are with jazz, it's really got to be something that combines itself to the music, like the Terry Lynn Carrington record that we just did. It's all about the women's movement in jazz, and the way in which there aren't a lot of women that are credited for writing jazz compositions, when in fact there are a lot of women that wrote about them. They just weren't put in the original book. And so Terry went in and made another book of jazz compositions all by women. And the record that she just did was highlighting that. So there was definitely, this the synergy that went on with what she was doing, not only for the music, but for the cause that stood behind the music. And because of that, she's gotten a lot of press in the major publications that still exist. But you just have to take what you have out there. Social media is now, it wasn't around then, it is around now. It does allow you to have platforms to reach people, whether it's the Facebook or Instagrams or TikTok or whatever it is. The fact is that you get your message out there, and you hope that by people seeing this message in all walks of life, it resonates enough for them again to go out and consume. And we don't care how you consume it, whether you buy a compact disc or piece of vinyl, or whether you go up and stream it. We just want you to share what we have to offer, and appreciate the music that we're really into.
So, of course, you're doing that balance that so many labels have done over the years of having a great, historical sort of catalog,
right,
and reissues. As you know, Polygram did that very well, and they all did. And then balancing that with new artists. When there's so many artists out there, notable and new, right? Notable artists who are sort of, on their own out there, untethered to any kind of major. How do you determine now who's going to fit for the label in terms of a new artist? You must be getting that old thing that we used to get back in the day, where people would just be sending tapes in like crazy. You probably are getting that, I would assume.
Yeah. To some degree, yeah, not as vibrant of the business side as it used to be either. But there's a lot of phone calls and a lot of tapes being sent, or links being sent now.
Right.
And we just have chosen to be very selective in our new release program. And we want to cover both established artists, heritage artists, like just doing the Wayne Shorter.
That Wayne one, yeah.
Yeah, that's dealing with heritage artists. We just took on the Chick Corea Electric Band catalog, which we're going to be releasing next year, which is a catalog piece. But I spent a lot of time listening to that music over the last couple of weeks for a particular meeting that we were having. But I was there. when Chick did all that music, and it was a masterful moment in time. And the point of the conversation today is that when I sat down and went through and listened to all this product again that I was part of when it was created, I was blown away at how relevant and how up to date it sounded today as it did. And that was 35 years ago, 36 years ago. When it comes to the new releases like the Terry Lynn Carringtons and the Ileana Eliases and the Count Basie and Stacey Kent and things like that, again, that's not a lot of albums for a company to release in basically a 2-year period. But we're doing it carefully. We're spending the money that needs to be spent in order to market properly and reach people. And we believe in the artists that we sign. So we want to make sure that, it's not one of those things where you put it out. If it doesn't sell a lot of records in the first 10 weeks, and you move on to the next thing. We don't do that. We are still working records that we put out a year ago. Because the buyers that buy our product aren't waiting in line to get it, but they're still appreciative of having the opportunity to get it. So based upon that, we feel like, okay, we didn't catch them in the first 2 months that we had it out in the marketplace. We might catch them in the 6th or 7th month or 8th month or whatever the month is, and reach them, and they may appreciate it and go out and consume it again, whichever way they choose to do that. And that happens, and we see that, and we see the long tail, so-called. So as we go forward, it's always about quality. It's always about discovery. So we're still looking to do that and find new artists. That's a much more difficult playing ground than it used to be because there aren't the number of outlets out there that there used to be in order to introduce new artists. But the future of any genre, and certainly jazz, is finding youth that interpret jazz the way they hear it today. And we are very keen on looking for those types of artists and have been, and have found a couple, not ready to announce it yet, but have found a couple that we're in the process of signing and putting their albums together, and we're going to release them. And that's a long haul project too, because you have to be prepared to know that nobody knows who they are. When you're putting out, a Count Basie record or a Wayne Shorter record, everybody knows who that is. It's just a matter of making sure they're aware that those particular records are out. When it comes to new artists, you've got to not only make people aware, but you've got to educate them as to what the artist is about. And that's a long process. So, but we're up for that. And we really believe that is the future, is to keep developing. And I've been lucky, I've been around artists in my life in this field that have been brand new, and all of a sudden they're, big artists and household name. Esperanza Spalding. I mean, that's one that I was very fortunate to be there in the beginning and, sit there as she won, a Grammy for the best new artist of the year. And there's a lot of pride that goes into it. Of course, you have to have somebody as great as she is musically to stand behind what's going on. And she is just one of those incredibly talented artists that exists.
What do you, is there a record coming out in 23 that you're really excited about? Any one or two particular albums that you think, okay, because these ones you did, they were very, Wayne Shorter Quartet live, that was, it was the great quartet for so long in jazz. And then Terry Lynn's was a really strong, Eliani's record is just beautiful. The Brazilian thing that you did. It was definitely on my top list. What do you have coming out that you're really excited about in that same way?
Well, I don't have a lot to announce today for new releases because if I went back in the history of the last 2 years, those new releases all came out in the fall. Well, there's a reason for that.
Oh,
because, and because we're a new company, we're sifting through everything and going through it and making our deals. That's a timely process. So there will be a few coming out in the fall. A couple of these new artists will be hopefully coming out in the summer. And then all along, we're going to be peppering it with our catalog product, which is obviously the Candid releases. And we have a Monk album coming out. We have another Mingus album coming out. And also the latter part of Candid dealt with more contemporary artists. So we have Jamie Cullum's Pointless Nostalgic, which was really the album that broke his career. We have another Stacey Kent record coming out, Kenny Barron. I mean, we have a whole host of records being released that we feel have legs on them to reach the consuming public, and we're going to go through the same process we did with the Nat Hentoff releases. And also, we were at Concord, and we are still now, the gatekeepers for the Ray Charles estate.
Whoa.
So we do all of the Ray Charles reissues at the same time, and we started it off. In fact, the first release that I was involved with for quote-unquote Candid/Tangerine, which was Ray's label, was, a 90-track, 6 CD box set from one of the most influential artists in the world. And that's what we put out. It was called True Genius. And then subsequent to that, we've been putting out single discs all the way through, re-releasing Genius Loves Company, Ray Sings, Basie Swings, a Christmas album that just dropped a few days ago, The Spirit of Christmas from Ray Charles. So the plate's full. I mean, there's a lot going on. So, and we're proud of, again, we're not just throwing it out in the market and seeing what it's going to do. We're really planning it properly so we can do justice to the artist, but also make a business out of it.
Well, Mark,
do it right.
Well, Mark, thanks so much for spending the time and taking us behind the curtain of a label that has an amazing long history, but I hope we'll have a long future. And again, the website is very good. There's something, sometimes, as you know, people do websites and they're just a bunch of CD covers up there, and it's just like there's not any kind of real engagement. But this candidrecords.com really does have some interesting ways for people to learn about the artists and the sessions and everything.
Well, Lee, I want to say thank you to you and to everybody at BGO. As we discussed before, I know a lot of people there, and I love the fact that you guys are so vibrant and still around and still doing what you're doing and being leaders in the field, and have been for many, many years. So thank you for the support, and thanks for doing the interview. It's great to get the word out there.
Thanks, Mark.
Have a happy holiday.
You too.
Bye-bye.